Good morning. It is my great honor to be introducing Paul Rozin to you this morning. If you were able to look at his published resume, he is a professor emeritus of biology and psychology, or really psychology at Penn, and he lists his research interests. There are 7 fields as wide as social and cultural psychology, developmental psychology, and so on. And the list of publications itself will tell you what a broad and creative person he is in fields that span sympathetic magical thinking, the ecology of eating, experienced and remembered pleasure for meals, duration, neglect, but minimal peak end effects. Paul is a scientist with a very creative sense of how to conduct experiments. I know something about this because I met him in a small cabal of people from various fields, mostly scientific, many of them from Penn, who would assemble in Barbara Kirschenblatt Gimblet's loft in Lower Manhattan in the 70s and maybe later, but we were trying to figure out what the dates were earlier, but it was a kind of proto-symposium, really, looking back on it. They weren't food historians, they were scientists interested in food, but it comes to the same thing. There were wide-ranging discussions, and an extraordinary group of people, including Solomon Katz, who eventually produced a multi-volume encyclopedia of food and culture, and Barbara Kirschenblatt Gimblet, who is now running the entire exhibition program at the Polish Museum of Jewish History in Warsaw, and who actually was an early connection of this group to the symposium. She published an article in PPC, the small magazine most of you know that was created by Alan Davidson and continues even now, well over 100 issues. But her article in October of 1987 was about 2 Yemenite recipes, Jewish recipes for udder and penis. And after I read this article, I sent her a note asking her to recommend her butcher. But at any rate, in this group of dazzling people, who I should also mention Linda Bartoshuk, who was the leading scholar of olfaction, which I would call smell, at the time. Anyway, we would come into this group, and there was a kind of free-form discussion. There may have been a special topic each time, but I realized, although I had no sense of Paul's luminous career, that he was the dominant figure through learning, imagination, and force of character. And all of these things are going to be extremely obvious to you in a minute or two, and I'm hoping that in the course of it he will clarify for me my dim memory of the experiment he did with Mexican dogs, trying to work on how their preference or their aversion to chili peppers could be demonstrated through the use of the technical term for it, I think, is coprophagy. You could look that up if you're not sure. I'm not going to explain it. Maybe he will. I give you Paul Rozin.
Thank you. This is a great audience for me. Much more interesting, much more diverse in interest than the audiences I usually present to. And just to follow up on Ray, Mexican dogs eat hot pepper all the time because they eat the garbage, which includes salsa every day. But I couldn't find a single dog in the village I worked in who liked hot pepper. They wouldn't eat it if they had a choice, but every person over 5 did. So I was sort of curious as to why that was true. They were eating the same food. Okay, but that's not, I'm talking about disgust, which I work a lot on, but there's so much disgust at this symposium that I thought I would talk a little at the end about something else, which is the tasting menu, which I also work on. Okay, so this is a picture of eating. It's what's called a mouth's eye view of eating. And it is basically, that's a piece of cucumber, and when you eat, you put something in your body. Now that's a special place, your body, and you're very careful about what goes in there. Think about all the things that could go in there. It's pretty scary. So people care deeply. They're very rarely neutral about putting something in their mouth. They either love it or hate it. And I'm interested in both the loving and the hate. We'll talk a little about the hate today. The basic concept that I want to use to organize first part of my talk is preadaptation, a word that you may not know. It's a word that comes from evolutionary biology, also used a lot in cultural evolution. Ernst Mayr is the person most associated with it, who is the greatest evolutionary biologist of the 20th century. And preadaptation involves the use of something that's already there for a new purpose. Okay? So let me give you a clear example that's related to all of us. The mouth is there to eat, right? It's to take food in, the tongue and teeth are involved in chewing the food. But language arises in our species, and what does it do? It takes advantage of the tongue and the pharynx and the teeth, and it uses them to produce phonology, the sounds. But they did not evolve for language. They evolved for eating food. So we would say that the mouth is pre-adapted for spoken language. And this is a very common process which occurs all over the place in biological evolution, and it's the main force in cultural evolution. Okay, so just to give you a quick example, metaphors are an example of a pre-adaptation where you have something that has a narrow meaning and you use it for a wider meaning. So in English, taste, the word taste having to do with eating food, is used as a general word to say a person has good taste, meaning generally sophisticated. The word sweet, a description of a taste, is used to mean nice. The word bitter is a reaction to unjust treatment, and the word sour or soured is loss of affection and resentful. These are all pre-adaptive changes where something which had a narrow focus is then widened. Salt to salty, down to earth, o' course. Okay, and in the case of food which starts out as nutrition and pleasure, in cultural evolution, is now used as a social marker to indicate your ethnicity or your caring for a person. It's used as an art form. Any of you spend more than $5 for dinner are buying some art, something special to eat. It's used as a metaphor, as I just told you, and it's used as a moral entity, most clearly in Hindu India, but all over the world. So, for example, smoking, which I'll call eating, is now morally charged in many contexts. Now, disgust is one of, in the West, we say there are 6 basic emotions: happiness, surprise, sadness, anger, fear, and disgust. That's not cut in stone. The Indian list of basic emotions, the Hindu list is 10. But anyway, disgust is one of them. And it looks like this. This is the way psychologists talk about disgust. There are elicitors of disgust. Where is this? There it is, elicitors. And what I care about right now is there's an emotion program that each emotion elicits. We'll talk about the elicitors of disgust in a minute. And that programming consists of a behavior, which in the case of disgust is withdrawal, pulling away from, an expression of the face and the body as well as the face, and a physiological response, which in the case of disgust is nausea. Okay, disgust is, if you think about your use of the word disgusting, you might say, I will not be making a political statement, but Donald Trump is disgusting, you might say. Some of you might say that. You don't mean that Donald Trump is offensive to eat, right? That idea never occurred to you. But disgust in its origin, its cultural origin, and disgust is a cultural event, is about food. The word disgust in English means bad taste. The facial expression of disgust is an oral expulsion, like that. The nausea, the physiological cue for disgust, is something that stops you from eating. And finally, it turns out the part of the brain called the insula is the part that is most active when people feel disgust, and it is directly connected to taste and smell. So this seems to have been originally a way of responding to food, a negative way of responding to food, being offended by food, which is then generally used to be offended by anything. Okay, so the origin of disgust, biologically present in animals as well as humans, is the bitter face. Okay, these are newborn infants. Put a little bitter solution on their face and you get this gape and the response. That's an innate response. And that is the face that is borrowed by the cultural evolution of disgust. Here is more of an adult disgust face in humans. There is a gape often of the bottom, tongue out, upper lip raised, nose wrinkled. And that's also getting it out of your nose and your mouth. Okay, after Darwin, who talked about disgust, it was really not disgust at all until a psychoanalyst, Andras Angyal, in 1941, wrote a really good paper, and he says, disgust is revulsion at the prospect of oral incorporation of an offensive substance. That's a really good definition, and that's what we've been talking about in this meeting, offensive substances, right? It's not just bad tasting things, because if you don't like beer, you wouldn't say it was disgusting, you'd just say, I don't like its taste. But if you don't like, let's say, kidneys, it's, ooh, I mean, it's not, you don't even know what they taste like, probably. You probably never tasted them, if you're an average person in the United States. The focus is on oral. We're going to talk about Americans, because we're really weird in many ways. But there's a lot of us, so we're worth hearing about. The focus is on oral, notice. And offensive substances, as Angyal decided them, are body waste products and animal products. And it's a remarkable fact that though meat is one of the most attractive foods cross-culturally, it is also the most tabooed food cross-culturally. We have a very ambivalent relation to meat. And here's disgust, which is our strongest negative response to food, right? And it's mostly focused on meat, one of our favorite foods. So just to give you a sense, why do we eat meat? So people say, why are insects disgusting? Or why are rats disgusting? That's not the question to ask. Almost all animal products are disgusting. And there's a very small subset that we eat. Now, Americans are champs at cutting this very narrowly. So there are over 4,000 species of mammals, and Americans eat 3. And they only eat the muscle or the milk. They don't eat the viscera. You don't see much viscera in the United States. Most people find them disgusting. So we're particularly narrow, say, certainly compared to the Chinese. But the point is, it's not really why do we find offal disgusting. It's why do we eat meat? Why do we eat meat? That's the interesting question. Of course, historically in humans, before evolution of culture, we were big meat eaters, and we still are, but from a very narrow set. So something has happened to that way we think about meat, which is another thing. So this is not real data, but I plotted it out anyway because it looks scientific. But this is, we can rate foods as delicious or disgusting. And so here, for Americans, here's cow, here's pig, here's lamb, and here's giraffes, horses, monkeys, cats, dogs, wolves, rodents, but they're all disgusting. Okay, there are a couple special cases. For example, people find insects disgusting to eat. But they don't find butterflies disgusting. They find them disgusting to eat, but not to be. So most things that we find disgusting to eat, we find are disgusting in themselves. But butterflies, we love them, but we don't like to eat them. Similarly with dogs. We love dogs, but we don't want to eat them. So there's a special interesting category of disgust, of things that aren't disgusting, but only disgusting to eat. I'm going to talk about some research early on this with April Fallon, who got her PhD on this with me. And we added to Angyal's definition, which is on the top, disgusting entities have contamination properties. If they touch a desirable food or other neutral or positive entity, they render it unacceptable. And there's a special role for decay, if they touch something that's decayed. So here's a laboratory study. We put people into the laboratory. We take fresh juice, orange and apple and grape. We pour it into glasses, from a new container. People drink them, they like them, they rate them, and then we drop a dead cockroach in one of those glasses. Just for a minute, we just drop it in and take it out. And in the other glass, because we're psychologists, because we don't want to just say that putting something in is bad, we drop a birthday candle holder. People have no trouble eating the one on the right. Nobody will touch the one on the left. We said, why not? They said, well, put a cockroach in. So we said, so what? And they say, typically, well, cockroaches, you know, they're dangerous, they carry diseases. We say, okay, we'll do it again, fresh juice, with a sterilized cockroach. This cockroach came out of an autoclave. It's safer than your fork. And people, we say, okay, put it in, take it out. They say, no. And we say, well, why not? They say, well, it's a cockroach. That is to say, you have put something disgusting in there and it's transferred its disgust. I don't even care if it's carrying diseases. It's yuck. Okay. Carol Nemeroff extended this work in her thesis, and we find that we call this contagion or contamination. It's a principle originally described at the turn of the 20th century by a number of anthropologists. They thought it was true of what they used to call primitive cultures. But we find it's true in every human being we've tried it on. Physical contact is necessary. A cockroach near your juice is not so bad, but in your juice is bad. It's permanent. This little transfer, what we call transfer essence of cockroach. So if we take that little glass of juice, we didn't actually do this, but you know it's true, and we took that glass and put it in your freezer for a year, and then we take it out, and assuming you remember, you'd say, oh, no, I don't want, that's cockroach. And it's dose insensitive. You don't have to touch it for long. You can go flick, flick with a cockroach, and that does it. So this is a powerful thing about disgust. Okay. Now, the whole world is disgusting. Here's somebody kissing his dog's face. He isn't thinking of where that face has been, right? The whole world is contaminated. My colleague Bob Giegengak, who's a geologist, calculated for me that everyone in Europe who drinks a glass of water drinks at least a few molecules that went through Adolf Hitler. Now, you know, that's pretty contaminating. We know that people won't wear Hitler's sweater or anything like that. They'd say, ooh, I wouldn't touch it. Well, okay, but you're drinking them because you can't help it. The world is contaminated. In your restaurant, you eat silverware and that's been used by all kinds of other people. Yes, you washed it, but if we wash the cockroach, it's still bad. But somehow you have to live in the world, right? The kitchen, you know what goes on in restaurant kitchens. People have often their shirts off. I mean, all kinds of stuff is going on. They taste the food. You know, you just don't think about it. And finally, the people who thought about it most are the Orthodox Jews, because they have, of course, contamination rules. They don't eat pork, for example. But, you know, if your neighbor is having a pork barbecue, and you're eating your food outside, let's say, and the breeze is blowing in the right direction, some of those pork molecules will get in your kosher beef stew. And the Hebrews have worried about that, because they worry about everything. And they actually have a rule, which says that if a contaminant falls into a kosher food by accident, and it's less than 1/60th of the volume of the total food, the food remains kosher. Now, so they've tried to deal with the fact that we live in a contaminated world, but we sort of ignore it unless it's put in our face, like with the cockroach and the juice. Now, the bad taste system, which is related to a response to bitter, is taken over by culture and used as a system that rejects a food. Originally, we call it core disgust, rejects a food or something disgusting like a rat, because of its nature or origin. You don't know what rat meat tastes like. It doesn't matter, because rats are disgusting, right? So this bad taste system and its facial expression is now used in a very different context, which we call core disgust. It's the first kind of disgust. How does it develop? We don't know, but it's acquired at about 2 or 3 years of age by toilet training. Little children, infants, do not show disgust. One of the best pieces of evidence for it is that feces is the prime disgust substance, and little babies eat feces. In fact, one reason we put diapers on them is to prevent them from doing it. It's not just to save you work. And the contamination idea occurs at about only 4 or 5 years of age. That is to say, a 3-year-old who won't eat a cockroach or won't eat a piece of poop will drink a glass of juice they like if you drop it in and take it right out. At about 4 years of age, this powerful rejection appears. Feces is the first discussed substance, and this aversion is reversed in interesting ways in people as they grow up, and that's what we're talking about here. The offal would be something that would probably be disgusting to a kid who's just learning disgust, but then they get to some subset of the disgusting things come to be liked. And we don't know how it happens. We don't know how disgust gets put into kids, probably something about toilet training. And but we do know that if you're exposed to something disgusting in a positive context, like your family is eating it all the time, you tend to come to like it as well. A best example of this is sushi. Sushi is disgusting to most people. It's raw fish. They think, ooh, raw fish. Ooh. And yet, in the 1970s, virtually every American would have said that. It started in Los Angeles in upper class groups meeting with Japanese businessmen usually. And by now, there are 3,500 sushi restaurants in the United States, and it's one of America's 10 most popular foods. And it's growing around the world. So here we can say that it is possible to take something that's disgusting and through a series of cultural interactions, make it acceptable. Now, there is a pathogen view of disgust, which makes some sense. These are the two people who are most associated with it. And they claim that disgust is an adaptive response developed to avoid pathogens because meat is the main source of pathogens. Some of it is caused by air, but those come from eating, almost always come from meat. And so that's natural that there would be a general disgust response to meat. And contamination is a perfect example of an adaptive response, because if something is carrying bacteria, even a brief flick can pass the bacteria into something else. So that's probably why we have this response. So meat is the focus, and decay. The classical odor of disgust is the odor of death and decay, which is, of course, an odor of microbial contamination. Now, I've extended this work with my former student, John Haidt, and colleague, Rick McCauley, and I don't want to tell you about this because it's not related to food, but I'm just going to give you a real quickie. We find that other things that are disgusting besides potential edibles are inappropriate sex. People say incest is disgusting, or sex with animals. Poor hygiene, filthiness. Gore, body boundary violations, people who have a sore or a piece of their viscera showing after one of these frequent events in the United States where people get shot up. And death. People don't like to touch dead bodies, and it seems to us that one of the functions that culture has used to instill something in us is we are afraid of dying, like all humans are, and we don't want to be reminded of it. And when we have some indication of death, like a dead body, we tend to show disgust and withdraw from it. So we take it out of our mind. Okay, here is a quote from Norbert Elias. Norbert, a very distinguished anthropologist, historian. People in the course of the civilizing process seek to suppress in themselves every characteristic that they feel to be animal. And we believe that disgust is the emotion, the civilizing emotion, the emotion that takes us away from animal things. We are not animals, and we don't want to think about the fact that we have hearts and livers and all that stuff, and that we make poop and all those things that we are part of our animal nature. This is a book about that. It's a wonderful book, my favorite book about food, The Hungry Soul by Leon Kass, and it's about European history, how in the course of European history, civilized eating occurred. And part of civilized eating is the suppression of disgust at the eating. So we eat at a table with silverware, it's all very nice, but think about it for a moment. The food in your mouth is disgusting to someone else, right? We manage to be looking at the person we are eating with, putting food in our mouth, chewing it, and talking to them, and they're talking to us through that same hole, and we don't see the food. It's remarkable. Little kids can't do that too well. So that's part of civilized eating. This is a nice quote from him. We eat as if we don't have to. We exploit an animal necessity as a ballerina exploits gravity. This is the theme of Cass's wonderful book. By the way, Cass is an MD. His field is originally biochemistry and medical ethics, but he teaches Old Testament at the University of Chicago. He's one of the rare people who's a humanist and a scientist. Okay, let me just give you an example of another form of disgust, which is called interpersonal disgust. Other people are disgusting if we don't know them, especially if we think something is odd about them, either their ethnicity or their history. So you all know about chocolate samplers, right? And you've all had the experience of taking up a piece of chocolate and biting in it, and it's a nut, and you wanted a cream. Right? Damn! Well, here we have pre-bitten chocolates. Now, no one will have any trouble with this, right? You can look in and see what's there. These won't sell. And they won't sell because someone else got in there, and they're in there like the cockroach. Okay. If you really want to get control of obesity, have people eat used food. So you can have used food in portions. You can eat as much as you want, cheap, and people won't eat much. You can get pizza crust, for example. That's disgusting because somebody else was in there. Okay. So our full model of disgust, which I will not discuss anymore, is that it first becomes core disgust, then it gets added to anything that reminds us we're an animal, like guts or death. Then it gets involved with other people, and finally it becomes a moral emotion. So people say Adolf Hitler is disgusting. And we are very interested in that process, how this happened, and what does it mean for something to be morally disgusting. And cigarettes have that property in the United States now and other places. Okay. Now, just one other point about disgust. Disgust is very negative, but it's funny. How could it be funny if it's so bad? Well, think of a big fly and a man eating at a fancy French restaurant. This is a cartoon by Kleban. Oh, sorry, I didn't get it right. So there's an inversion of negativity. People laugh when you give them the option of, say, ask them to spit in the glass of water and then drink it. And they won't do it, and they laugh because it's crazy. Yeah? We call this whole issue, which I'll come back to, benign masochism. It's a form of doing negative things that we really know are okay, but our body is saying they're negative. So now the cartoon, sorry. Here's the man with the fly, and he says to the waiter, I'll have the gazpacho, leeks with vinaigrette with shrimp, marinated zucchini, orange mousse, a bottle of Côte de Rhône Rouge, 59, and bring some shit for my fly. Now, Kleban is a great cartoonist, by the way. Look him up he has a lot of stuff like this. The point of this is that we buy these books, and we enjoy this, even though it's offensive. But you see, it's benign masochism. It's not really offensive. I mean, we're not actually there. We're just enjoying the fact that something like that can happen somewhere else. Here's another example. This is a big exhibit in the United States on the viscera and poop and disgust. And this one went all around the United States. People paid a fair amount to go. And in this particular thing, there's a piece of plastic tube which is supposed to be the gut, and that's supposed to be the rectum. And here is some poop on the ground, and the kids crawl through it. And the parents are photographing them, and they're loving all of this because, you see, it isn't really poop. And we like to fool our biology, which is saying, poop, away, away. No, it's okay. Okay. Here's Noma, as you know, one of the world's great restaurants. And one of the meals I ate there, one of the dishes was live shrimp, which are on ice, so they weren't too active. And more surprisingly yet, live ants in a green sauce. Now, most people ate these things, and of course they knew it was safe. So this is another case where even you're doing something aesthetic, but it's with something disgusting, but it's okay because it's not really disgusting. I mean, there's no real danger here. No danger of pathogens. Here is a dish from Bohr in Copenhagen. Bohr is run by some former Noma people from Noma Kitchen. And this dish, in this dinner, we heard about this in yesterday's talk, we basically ate a sheep. We had the testicles, we had everything you could think of, and this part was the eyeballs. Those are two sheep eyeballs, and in case you didn't know that, they put glasses in front of them. So, what's interesting about this is we're talking about offal here, which is, on the face of it, disgusting, and yet it's a very desirable thing for many people. Okay. Most every culture takes something that is disgusting, smells of decay, and makes it into a delicacy. Cheese is the obvious thing for Western cultures, which is found to be disgusting by most other cultures in the world because it smells, it's rotted milk. And Southeast Asian fermented fish sauce, which has a rotten smell. Those of you who eat Southeast Asian food and love it, usually don't sniff that sauce before you put it on, because if you do, it'll smell pretty bad. But of course, the smell is covered in the dish. Okay, so this thing about benign masochism, as far as you know, is uniquely human. We are the only species, as far as we know, that intentionally engages with things that are biologically negative and enjoys them. We enjoy disgust. Now, disgust is not biologically negative. It's acquired early, but then it becomes very negative. But in certain contexts, like cheese, we love it. Enjoying oral pain, chili pepper, that's the same thing. No, animals don't like chili pepper. Mammals don't like chili pepper. It burns their mouth. It's perfectly safe. And we like the fact that our mouth is burning, but it's really okay to eat, even though our mouth is saying, get this out of there. We like bitter, which is innately negative. Coffee being a good example. We enjoy fear. We go down roller coasters. Can you imagine a dog getting on a roller coaster? I mean, that would be crazy. They'd be scared. We like it that our body is scared, our heart is pounding, and we know we're not really in trouble. And most interesting, perhaps, we enjoy sadness. We even like to cry. We go to a sad movie. We pay to see something that really is sad. But remember, it isn't really happening to you, and you know that. You're an audience. If it's happening to you, it isn't funny. Okay. So now disgust is also, though it's adaptive to keep us away from pathogens, and it also is a barrier. So it avoids pathogens, but recycled water, which is the best way known now to treat water, where water is short, you take sewage and directly convert it to good water. It's perfectly pure. It's modest cost and very good quality, but it's very hard to get recycled water plants up in the United States. And the motto is toilet to tap. Now, all water is toilet to tap. That's related to the Hitler molecules that we talked about before. But this is sort of direct, and people don't like it. And they're actually resisting a very good public health measure because of disgust. Insect consumption. Insects are a great source of protein. They're healthy, they're good for the environment, they're easy to grow, and there's a billion people eat them regularly, but most of the rest of the world is sort of offended and finds them disgusting. It's too bad, because they could really add something of reasonable taste and good nutritional quality to their diet. People are upset now about fecal transplants, where you get new microorganisms into your gut by extract of feces of another person. Elective colostomy, that is, there's some people who can get a colostomy, they don't have to, it's an option. And a lot of the resistance to it is that people are disgusted by the fact that their feces is going to come into a bag here instead of out there. And sometimes that's maladaptive, because that's the best way to deal with their problems, their pain and their bleeding. Food waste, a lot of food waste is the fact that we're offended by food sitting in the refrigerator. So, first of all, somebody else ate it, even if it was in your family, or maybe even you. It sort of feels a little off and disgusting, even though it's quite safe. In vitro meat, which you will hear about tomorrow, a lot of people are disgusted by the idea of growing meat in a petri dish. And genetically modified foods. Now, Europe is much more negative about this than America, and England is in between, by the way, Europe and America. And working with two colleagues, Sid Scott and Yoel Inbar, we have discovered that first of all, about half of Americans are opposed to it. But they don't really care that much, unlike the Europeans. But the interesting thing about them is the majority of the people who are opposed to genetically modified organisms in the United States, and we believe in Europe, we're getting the data right now, are opposed to it morally. They believe there's something wrong with doing this. They don't really, you can argue with them about whether it's good for people, whether there are really any dangers, which none are known, by the way, but it doesn't matter. They think it's just bad. It's like, selling your infant or something. We find that those people who believe that are particularly disgusted by genetically modified foods. That is to say, the moral force, just like moral vegetarians tend to be disgusted by meat, whereas health vegetarians tend not to be. And here, people who are morally opposed to genetically modified food adopt this disgust response. Okay, now I'm now going to shift from disgust. I want to talk about something positive. I'm going to talk about the tasting menu. This is work with Alexander Rozin, my son, who is a professor of music theory and a molecular gastronomer. He has 2 lives. Let me talk very quickly. This is something that most people don't know, and it's really important. There are 3 aspects of an event. This is work by Daniel Kahneman and his colleagues. There are 3 aspects of an event. Your anticipation, you're going to have a meal. You're looking forward to the meal. Let's say it's a place you'd like to go. You're going to have the experience of the meal, and then you're going to have the memory of the meal, right? There are 3 different things. And we ask people, what's most important to you in life? Looking forward to things, experiencing them, or remembering them? And this is an American adult sample. The only point I want to make here is that people disagree about what's most important. Experience wins, but there are a lot of people who think it's the memory or the anticipation. I want to talk about the memory now. But first, let me ask you, by a show of hands, what is your favorite course in a meal? Appetizer, hands up. Main course. Dessert. Okay, well, appetizer won, main course was second, and dessert was third in your hand. That's actually what the data says. What the data says from chefs. I've collected this data. There's a meeting in Copenhagen where I gave this talk, this piece of the Great Chefs meeting. It's 500 people, was every year. And I asked the chefs, and appetizer won by a landslide. But if we ask regular people, adults, France and the United States, main course wins, okay? But the important thing I want to mention here is the dessert in your vote and in their vote is not the peak of a meal. Now that's going to turn out to be important. Let's consider remembering the content of a great event. I want you to think quickly of a great meal you've had, a multiple course meal. You got it? Okay, think about, what did you eat at that meal? I bet you can't remember more than 2 things from that meal. This is a great meal. How can you not remember what you've eaten? That's typical. I say to people, I just had this great meal, it happens to be at Sant Santi in Barcelona. And people say, well, great, what did you eat? And I say, okay, fortunately I take pictures of it all. Okay, now, the important thing about this is if you have a really good meal, you can spend more time remembering it than eating it. So I ate a great meal. My greatest meal was at El Bulli. It was 6 hours long, 34 courses. But I remembered it for days. I mean, I think about it all the time. So your memory for something is really important. And when you recommend a restaurant to a person, you don't say, you're not recommending your experience, you're recommending your memory of the experience. So I said to the chefs, what would you like to do? If you're successful, have people have the best experience at the meal or the best memory for the meal? And they said, oh. Well, the reason that matters is your memory distorts your experience in particular ways shown by Daniel Kahneman. First of all, what affects your memory? Primacy, the first thing you have is particularly well remembered in general, not just about food, and the peaks, the very special things. If you repeat a meal, you'll, of course, remember it better. And if there's any kind of organization in the meal, as there is in a story, so you'd say, you saw a movie and you forgot. You said, what was the movie about? Oh. And then someone says, oh, it ended with this. And you say, oh, yeah. And now you can sort of remember the story. So because those things are related. I'm noticing this because that's not true of meals. And surprise is very memorable, but surprise is only good once. How often have you had a really good dish which you would never have again? But you're glad you had it. It was a surprise. It was a new experience. It wasn't actually a great oral experience. Okay. Now, here's a question we ask people. When I go to my favorite restaurant, I choose to order my favorite item on the menu. How many of you will order that? Or a new item that I've never tried. Okay, most of you will say that. Not most of all people, but most of you, because you're foodies, would say that. Okay, now let's look at that. If you order a new food, your anticipation will be less because you don't know what it's going to be. If you can order your favorite dish, you can picture it. You can say, oh, I'm going to have the stuffed eggplant with shrimp. Chinese restaurant with black bean sauce. Oh, I love it. I'm going to go there. I'm going to have it. So I have a very clear anticipation. Your experience will probably be better. You know that's a good food, whereas it's probably going to be a good food if it's not what you have. So you should order this old food. But your memory will not be helped because if it's the 20th time you're eating that same dish, you won't create a new memory. Whereas if you have a new dish, you will. So if you value memories, you'll be trying new things. Okay. Now, it turns out the two features of memories that distort experiences are, one, the ending is very important for your pleasure of an experience. The last thing that happens, and the peak is very important, out of proportion to the other things. Okay. Now, let's just take a quick look. The cultural evolution of the Western meal, if you look at modern tasting restaurants, goes from the French-style appetizer, main course, dessert, to the new tasting menu, right? A whole bunch of things in a row. And actually, if you look at music, it's similar that the classic music is overture symphony, another symphony or a quartet or something, and now it's more of an album. So you know you're listening to the, and you don't get choice in this, by the way. You just go there and eat. And most restaurants don't even tell you what you're getting until after. If you get a menu, it's at the end of the meal. Now, let's consider the modern tasting meal. 10 to 15 courses, of course it goes up. The guest does not order from a menu. They all eat the same food at the same time. That's really nice. You can talk about the food. One person isn't eating a pork chop while the other person's eating a hamburger. You're all eating the same food. You're having so you don't have to share. And the conversation is more likely to be about the food because it's a shared experience. And it's, by the way, great for the kitchen because they know exactly what they're serving. They don't have to worry about stocking something that is not going to be used. Now, the great restaurant that really started this run is El Bulli, Ferran Adria in Spain, north of Girona. And this, I'm just going to show you one or two pictures from this because it's relevant. So this was the best, maybe the best dish I ever had. And it is extract of pine nuts, as pine nutty as you can get, steaming hot in the bottom of that glass, but the glass is coated in ice. So when you drink this, it passes over the ice and it's cold, but the aroma is from something hot. Cold things don't have aroma. This is the only time in your life you've drunk something cold that's aromatic. And it's an amazing experience. This is the genius of Adria. Here's another dish, which is a sushi. Very good sushi. And that little thing is a little spray can of ginger. And what you do, and this is my son Alexander, my co-author, you spray your mouth with ginger and coat it first, and then you eat the sushi. That inverts the normal experience, which is that you eat the sushi and then the ginger flavor arises. Now that's just a trick, but it's delicious. The genius of Adria, absent from some of his imitators, is they get the excitement of this, but they don't get the great taste. And Adria knew how to combine these two things. Okay, so we decided, my son's a music theorist, what can we learn from music? Music theory and concerts. Concerts have been going on for a lot longer than restaurants have been going on. One thing is that repetition is extremely common in music, over and over again. We don't repeat in meals. I mean, you may have 4 bites of something, but then it's over. You don't come back to it. Maybe we should. Theme and variation, extremely common in music, where you take something and you play with it over time. Another thing is symmetry, and there's a structure to a piece of music or even a concert where you get, symmetry, you have all sorts of structural relations. Most of the tasting menus are just one thing after another. They're all good. Even at El Bulli, they were all great, but still. Okay, and there's a coherence to a piece of music, all the way through the movements of a piece of music. In the case of an opera, there's actually a narrative attached. If a meal had a narrative, you'd remember it much better because there'd be a story to go with it. So my son is a molecular gastronomer, a modern chef, and he makes dinners for people. So here's an example of a meal stimulated by music theory. First of all, it starts with a rose petal sorbet. It ends with a plum clove float. So there's similar thing. And the second thing is, this is a 15-course dinner. The second thing was heirloom tomatoes 5 ways, theme and variation. And the last thing, the dessert, was summer peaches 5 ways. It's extremely easy to remember this because it's very striking and symmetrical. So here's the tomato 5 ways. That's a grilled tomato. And each of these is a different variation on tomato. That's a gazpacho. So you see how I can take a food and play with it and make it interesting, make a story out of it. Here's a dessert. That's the roasted peach. And 4 different peaches. That's a peach gazpacho at the top. So the typical meal that you get in a restaurant, if this is how much you like it, it starts out relatively low. The main course is the peak, and then it goes down. But if you were doing psychology and you wanted to remember the meal and enjoy it maximally in memory, you would start with something good because that's going to be one of the most memorable things, and you would end with something really good. Now, dessert is not the favorite food. You should end with something really positive if you want a good memory. So if you had a 13-course meal, a psychologist would say, give people the first 12 courses, and then give them a picture of each course and say, what did you like best? And they say, that one. You say, okay, that's your last course. I found the chefs really interesting in this. Okay, so at the end of this talk, I don't have a picture of it, Ferran Adria was in the audience, and he came up and hugged me. I have never been hugged after a talk. And of all the people who I could think of who I'd want to be hugged by, it's Ferran Adria. So this is the two of us after that talk, but okay. So I'm going to end with a very brief bit of verse because I'm in England, and this is Shakespeare country, of course. So I've modified a little Shakespeare to talk about the basic American problem, but it's also around the world, the ambivalence about eating, getting fat, being toxic, food being toxic, and so on. So here we go. To eat or not to eat? That is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mouth to brood, or risks and trials of food ingestion, or not consume the newest food. And by refusing, live on what I know is good, for by this act at once be finished with the mouth ache and the strangest food, the daily stress. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished. To sniff, to taste, to chew. To eat the known, aye, there's the grub. For in that state of neophobic bliss, there are the wondrous foods that I will miss. This gives me pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of mortal bites. For who could bear the fumes of food with vicious sights? The slime of sushi, the horror of haggis, the trauma of tripe whose pores exude a pus, the viscous stream of clotted cream, the British breakfast, Brexit anorectic. One, I myself my own flatus troll, with sickened tongue and bellyache, 'tis wisdom that I guard my buccal hole, to quell the dread of something that I slaked. The undiscovered food whose toxic mode with pain or death transforms us with its calorie load. This makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others that we know not of. This caution does make cowards of us all. I'll never taste of leg of frog and bloated blowfish, tasty but decayed, or stew of snake with lots of grog. Adieu to Roquefort and the food of France. The fun of food is forfeited for fear. But no, at last I've come unto my senses. I'll take my risk. My liver has defenses. My tongue is poised, my mouth agape, my jaw unclenched, my palate primed. For gustatory pleasure comes as well with chances of a gustatory hell.